are listening to Lighthearted, the official podcast of the United States Lighthouse Society. My name is Jeremy D'Entremont. Welcome. My co-host today is Cindy Johnson, Chapter Leadership Committee member of Friends of Portsmouth Harbor Lighthouses and ACE copy editor. Hi, Cindy.
Hi, Jeremy. Thanks.
Today is May 1st, 2022, and this is episode 171 of Lighthearted. In a few minutes, we will hear an interview with Getjan de Boer of the Dutch Lighthouse Society discussing the preservation of the lighthouses in the Netherlands. How is spring going in Arizona, Cindy?
Well, it's really pleasant here, I have to say. It's warm, but not too hot during the day, and then pretty cool at night and lots of really neat wildlife.
Sounds good. It was a beautiful day here on the New Hampshire seacoast today in the 60s and sunny. Yeah.
Finally, right?
Did two walks outside today and enjoyed it very much. But I'm going to Michigan in a few days, and I understand it was 32 and snowing in the Upper Peninsula where I'm heading.
Oh, boy.
So we'll see. Yeah, I've been in Arizona before. I know it's beautiful, but do you ever miss the coast and the lighthouses?
Oh, yes, definitely. On my recent trip back home, I drove up the coast of New Hampshire and got some clam chowder one day. And then another day, I met our good friend and other regular co-host, Michelle, for a nice visit at Nubble Light in Cape Nettic, Maine.
That's a pretty special place. Good place to meet. Yeah.
So I kind of got my seacoast, ocean and lighthouse fix while I was there.
Excellent. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's important. You got to get that fix now and then. So
absolutely.
Glad you got there. So we'll get to our discussion of Dutch lighthouses in a minute. But have any interesting things happened on this date in lighthouse history, Cindy?
Yep. On May 1st, 1862, the current Navesink twin lights in Highland, New Jersey were first lighted. The light station was considered the primary landfall for vessels heading to New York Harbor. The station was given two lights to make it easy for mariners to differentiate it from Sandy Hook Light and the Sandy Hook lightship offshore. The architecture of the brownstone towers is often compared to a medieval castle.
The Navesink Twin Lights station was the first in the country to get Fresnel lenses from France. The lenses were put into operation in March 1841. New first-order lenses were installed when the station was rebuilt in 1862. The North Light was discontinued in 1898, and the South Light was given a new first-order bivalve Fresnel lens from Paris, powered by an electricity plant on the site.
The new light was so blindingly powerful that the keepers had to wear protective goggles if they entered the lantern room when the light was on. There were many complaints from neighbors about the light. It disturbed sleep and caused nervous afflictions, they said. Cows refused to give milk and chickens stopped laying eggs. The lighthouse board took mercy, and some of the lantern panes on the land side were darkened to shield the neighbors from the light.
The 1898 first-order lens from the South Tower is now on display in the former powerhouse. And I just want to throw in here, too, that I saw that lens back in the days when it was at the Boston Museum of Science when I was a kid. It was on display there for quite a few years before it went back to the Navesink Twin Lights. And that would definitely have been the first Fresnel lighthouse lens I ever saw in my life. And I think it had an impact on me. So
it must
anyway,
have, yeah.
The museum at the Twin Lights Historic Site, a National Historic Landmark, is open all year. So, Cindy, please help me tell our listeners about our guest today, Getjan de Boer of the Dutch Lighthouse Association.
Sure, Jeremy. The country of the Netherlands conjures images of canals, fields of tulips, and windmills, but the country is also home to dozens of historic lighthouses, and some of them are major tourist attractions. Dutch lighthouse history reaches all the way back to the 14th century.
The Dutch Lighthouse Association was founded in 1992 with the objective of uniting people with a fascination for lighthouses. In more recent years, the association has worked to preserve and repurpose historic maritime structures in the Netherlands, including lighthouses and lightships. 4 times each year, the association publishes a magazine with articles about lighthouses and their preservation.
Our guest today, Getjan de Boer, is a board member of the Dutch Lighthouse Association. He works in heritage preservation at the National Dutch Heritage Agency, And he's also currently working on a book on the lights of the Scheldt River.
Getjan's first name, by the way, is spelled Gertjan. You'll hear that we discuss the proper pronunciation in the interview. I spoke with Getjan recently via Zoom. Let's listen to our conversation now. I'm speaking today with Getjan de Boer of the Dutch Lighthouse Association. In a moment, I'm going to ask Jan to properly pronounce his full name. I'm using his nickname, basically, Jan, but his name is hard for my American tongue to pronounce. But it's now evening where Jan is in Utrecht in the Netherlands. It's mid-afternoon here in New Hampshire. We're speaking via Zoom. And I want to thank you so much for joining me today, Jan.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Jeremy.
Could you go ahead and properly pronounce your name for me, please?
Yeah, I will. Yeah, for people from abroad, my name is pretty hard to pronounce, but it's Gertjan. There are actually two names combined.
Getjan. Is that remotely close?
That was very good, actually.
So let me ask you, starting out, we're going to talk about the Dutch Lighthouse Association, talk a bit about some of the Dutch lighthouses, but how did you personally get involved with the Lighthouse Association?
Yeah, well, my fascination for lighthouses started at a young age. I remember visiting lighthouses with my parents on holidays. And during my history, I studied history in Groningen. I started to get more and more interested in maritime history. And of course, I think, as you know, the Netherlands is a seafaring country. Our history is very much entangled with international trade and exploring. Then after my study in history, I specialized in heritage. I found out that I was actually more interested in the remains of history in our daily life than in archives and books. And I became especially interested in how people used to navigate in our rivers in the Netherlands. So I did my final thesis on the Belgium system of lights, which was built on the Dutch soil, so on Dutch ground, which led ships to the harbor of Antwerp. And after that, I was actually hooked. I became a member like 2.5 years ago. And for 1 year now, 1.5 years, I'm also a board member. And I am especially looking at the ways how we can maintain the heritage, so the part of what we can do in the future with the lighthouses. And also to make sure that the lights keep burning, because that's a big challenge here in the Netherlands. We are a small country, as you probably know, but the ambitions are very big. Yeah. And space is very scarce here. So it's a challenge. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. It always is everywhere. And I think you agree. It kind of goes hand in hand, preserving the actual structures and preserving their history. We need to do both. And I think that's what your organization is doing. You mentioned to me that you are actually working on a book. Is that right?
Yeah, I am. I'm working on a small book on the same subject where I did my master thesis on. This is a very interesting topic. Belgium was once, with the Netherlands, one kingdom. And in 1830, they gained their independence. But their biggest harbor, which is Antwerp, it's a well-known city and a very big harbor, one of the biggest in the world, can only be reached by the Scheldt. It's a river. But the Scheldt River goes through the Netherlands. So they had to build lighthouses and a system of lights in a Dutch river right after a war. So that's a very interesting topic. And the Dutch actually tried to stop them, and also with in mind our own harbors like Rotterdam and Amsterdam. Maybe we'll get to those harbors later. But still today, these structures are still there, most of them. They are kind of forgotten, these lighthouses, and they are still property of the Belgian state, but still on the Dutch ground. So it's a very interesting theme, and I'm indeed working on a small book on that.
Excellent. I look forward to seeing that. Yeah, I was just reading online when I was trying to do a little bit of research. I didn't realize that Antwerp is absolutely one of the biggest ports in the world, if not the biggest.
Yes, yeah.
Which, yeah, I knew it was big, but I didn't realize it was that busy. So very interesting. And how many lighthouses in the Netherlands?
Yeah, approximately it's like 55, but it's always the definition of a lighthouse, which is quite hard to say what is a lighthouse and what's a smaller light, but let's say around 55.
Yeah. I know what you're talking about. Same thing here. There's some debate over what is an official lighthouse. Yeah. So it's hard to give exact counts. Is there a government agency that still manages the lighthouses and aids to navigation in the Netherlands?
Yes, there is, but it's quite complex situation. We have the Department for Infrastructure and Water in the Netherlands. They used to own all the lighthouses and also all the smaller lights. But during the time when the lighthouses are losing their function now, from their function, they try to get rid of them, actually, just to turn off the light and to demolish them. But some of them are monumental, of national value. That means they cannot be demolished. And actually, there's a law in the Netherlands that everything that is a monument of national value has to be maintained. So the department has to maintain those lighthouses, but they are now asking questions about, do we also have to keep the light on? What is the definition of maintaining? Is that just sometimes some paint, or is that also keeping the Fresnel lamp intact? Now it's getting harder and harder to keep them in good shape.
Yeah.
In short, yes, the state owns them and should maintain them, but the reality is, as you can imagine, more complex.
Yeah, well, it's similar in many countries, including the United States, where our Coast Guard still owns a lot of the lighthouses, but gradually other organizations are getting involved in their preservation. Similar things are happening all over the world, I think. In Netherlands, are there various types of organizations that are working besides yours, but maybe individual organizations working with individual lighthouses? Is that happening around the country as well?
Yeah, this is an interesting topic, Jeremy, because what we see lately is we have one lighthouse in the Netherlands, which is in a very bad state. It's called the Lange Jaap, near Den Helder. It's actually the biggest lighthouse in the Netherlands, and it was almost on the brink of collapse, like a couple of months ago. It's also a monument of national value. So then a debate came, and policymakers were thinking maybe we can actually demolish it, maybe we can just get rid of it. And then you saw the local community and other interest group really standing up. You could see how they were identifying themselves with that lighthouse. They were really a lot of tens of thousands of people were actually signing a petition. They were going to our government with a paper saying how much they found this of value. When the future of the lighthouse is in debate, you can see the local community standing up. And that's a very interesting new form of protest. And besides that, we also, our association is of course always working on this, but also other heritage voluntary organizations are also keeping lighthouses in mind.
Yeah. Well, again, it's a similar situation in this country and a lot of other places where, I think people in a lot of these communities see the lighthouse as an essential sort of centerpiece or icon of their communities. Would you say that's the case there as well in these coastal communities?
Yeah, definitely. People were making socks with the lighthouse and selling them online to get money for maintaining it. People were handing out petitions. People were calling the local government, but also the national government, sending emails. It was in the national news. It was in the papers for like 3 weeks. There were people actually almost crying when they heard the news. So indeed, that sense of identifying with that object, it was very interesting. And also what was quite surprising, pretty close to there is the Marines in the Netherlands. Our national Marine, and they were also in protest because they have these annual exercise where they were dropped somewhere in the North Sea and they had to get back to their barracks just by using the light of the lighthouse. So when they heard that the lighthouse was maybe going to get demolished, they were also in protest. So there was also I didn't expect that. Nobody did, but it was cool.
Yeah, interesting. Everybody loves lighthouses, which is a good thing. Translating it into actual money to keep up the lighthouses is not always easy, but people love them all over. So let's talk about the Dutch Lighthouse Association. Two-part question. How old is it? When did it start, the Dutch Lighthouse Association, and what are the primary missions of the association?
It was established in 1992, so we are 30 years now. We have 537 members, some even from abroad. One is in Mexico, one is in Sweden, some Germans. And we have three main missions. We contribute to the preservation of maritime heritage in the Netherlands, especially lighthouses, of course. We promote and we also try to make archives accessible on the theme of lighthouses. And of course, we share with each other the interest and the fascination for the phenomenon of lighthouses in general. So we also do excursions in the Netherlands a couple times a year, but also abroad. Like we're going to northern France this year for a week. So that's what we do. We don't do tours with people who are not member, only for members. But that way we also have the contribution annually. So we also have some money to organize ourselves. But it's all voluntary work.
Are these like bus tours you're talking about? Or?
Yeah, bus tours. Yeah.
Yeah.
Boat. We also visited Great Britain, for example, but never to the America, for example. Not that far, but
come over here sometime. I can maybe help you out with that. I would love to see that happen. Yeah. And I'd also love to, well, the U.S. Lighthouse Society has taken tours to the Netherlands in the past. I think it's been a few years, but Jeff Gales, the director who you've met via Zoom, I know has been there, I think, on one of those tours. And I hope to do it one of these years. I hope that'll happen.
Just let us know. Yeah.
I would, of course. Yeah. I really, really hope that happens. So the association, Dutch Lighthouse Association, publishes a quarterly magazine. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. What is it called?
It's called the Vuurboot.
So that's the Dutch word for lighthouse, right?
No, it's not.
It's not. Oh, what is the Dutch word for lighthouse?
Vuurtoren.
Oh, okay. And
Vuurboot is like an old name, which you can read in old texts. It was more like an oil lamp in the Middle Ages, for example. We use the old word for lighthouse. It's the name for our magazine. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that for me. I knew the first part of the word is the same, but I confused the words. And what other historical articles in the magazine? What types of things?
Yeah, we also have historical articles every time, like 2 or 3, sometimes lighthouses from the Netherlands, sometimes from abroad. And we also have theme every number. For example, people who collect lighthouses or who paint lighthouses, where it's more the way people identify themselves with a lighthouse, and they explain why they do it like that, and what their motivation is to for example, paint every painting a lighthouse, or to collect small lighthouses. Within the association, we have 3 members, and I am one of them who I don't write articles. I write, for example, a letter to a local municipality when a lighthouse is in danger. So it's like heritage protection group of volunteers.
And I just gave you an article for the magazine as well, a little overview of American lighthouse history and the U.S. Lighthouse Society. So thank you for giving me that opportunity.
For our next number, I'm going to translate it, and in our next number we will publish this. Yeah.
Excellent. I look forward to seeing it. So let's talk a bit about some of the notable lighthouses in the Netherlands. And you've mentioned a couple already that I've heard of. Are there some that are really popular tourist attractions?
Yes, some are definitely. As I'm thinking about this, I would like to highlight 3 of them. Mm-hmm. Together, you could say that they somehow tell the story of the history of the Netherlands. So I will begin with the first one now. As you probably know, the Dutch live with water. We live in a delta. Half of our country lies under sea level, and we have 6 very big rivers coming from the hinterland to the sea through the Netherlands. So our history is, of course, a history which is very connected with water. We have permanently a battle with water, but it's also hugely profitable due to the great maritime connections we have and we always had. So the first lighthouse is which I would like to name here is the Brandaris. It's on Terschelling. It's one of the islands in the north. First one was there built in the 14th century, like 1324, I think. It's very early. It was built there as a lightning guide to warn people that these 5 islands were there. But the sea, in the Netherlands, the sea takes land back. These islands are actually moving. So there's sand coming on the east and sand removing on the west. So in 1570, 200 years later, this tower was completely swallowed by the sea. And then the people built a new one in 1594, and that one is still standing there. And for me, this kind of symbolizes the struggle we as the Dutch have with water. We lose some land every time, and we also lose buildings and also lives, of course. The next one, which I would like to mention here, is near Amsterdam. The Dutch had their golden age in the 17th century, so 1600s, 1700s. You probably know the great paintings, the Rembrandts, and you also probably know the Amsterdam houses and the canals. This is all from the 17th century. There's also most of our protected heritage is from this 100 years. During this age, Amsterdam was the biggest harbor in the world, and our ships moved everywhere. So this lighthouse was built just outside Amsterdam on the east. It is now actually Sweet Lake, but it used to be Salt Sea there. The first lighthouse built there is unknown, but it's probably 14th or 15th century. And the first stone one was built there in the 17th century, just to guide the ships to Amsterdam, like the hundreds of ships, thousands of ships each year that were going to the Amsterdam harbor. So this one, which you can still see, it's later a bit changed in 1838, but it's still standing there. It's really beautiful. It's standing on a small island just east of Amsterdam. And for me, this one symbolizes the wealth that the water always brought us. So the first one symbolized for me the danger water is, and this one symbolizes the wealth, this lighthouse. And the last one I want to point out is called Krachenburg. It's also a very hard name, I think, for you to pronounce, but it's called Krachenburg. It moved some 100 years later, just after the Second World War. This is a period where the Dutch, again, tried to maintain the water. They actually had great ideas. It was a period just after the Second World War where people were really looking at the future. And the idea in the Netherlands came to create a piece of land which used to be water, but on a scale which we had never done before. As we used to using windmills and sometimes like 10 windmills to pump the water out, now we used huge machines. And we didn't do it with a Sweet Lake, but with a salt sea. We decided to get the salt sea, the water out. We call it actually inpolderen in the Netherlands. So in 1941, during the Second World War, this project was started. They started pumping, and 1 year later, 1 year of pumping, this sea was dry. But what you could see now is these islands that used to be in that sea were now like hills in the landscape. So if you're looking at this lighthouse, it's now standing in the middle of only land. So you got, everywhere you look, you see agricultural land. And then in the middle of it, you suddenly see a lighthouse, which looks really bizarre. And you have to know the Dutch history to understand why it is standing there. Right. So this one symbolizes for me the knowledge of water that we have in the Netherlands, that we always live and work with water. But it also shows the enormous impact that we as the Dutch, as the people in the Netherlands have on our landscape. Nothing in the Netherlands is even close to natural. Everything in the Netherlands is man-made. And that's very interesting, but it's also kind of shocking to realize. So these three lighthouses are also very popular by people to visit because they're also very beautiful, but they also tell the story of the Netherlands.
Yeah, very interesting. It's interesting how lighthouses everywhere, have so many stories to tell, and they're kind of like sort of like a window into history. And you start exploring the history of a lighthouse, and like you said, why it looks like it's so far inland now, and it tells you a lot about the history of the area. So, are there also any lighthouses where people can spend the night? Like we have some of those in this country. Is that being done at all there?
Yeah, but only two. Only two.
Okay.
So as I said, most of the lighthouses are still owned by the state, and they actually close them off. They aren't even able to visit them, so that's a pity. But two of them are now in private hands, and you can indeed sleep in there. And I know that quite some marriages started there. I know that people ask their fiance, ask their girlfriends to marry there. Yeah.
Lighthouses seem to be a popular place for proposals. It happens here too. So people might not realize that Rotterdam even a bigger port than Antwerp? They're two of the biggest ports in the world, right? And there must be a lot of lighthouses around Rotterdam, but also Amsterdam.
Yeah.
Also, those are all huge ports.
Well, it is very interesting. In the 17th century, Amsterdam was a very big harbor city, also in the 18th century. So the lighthouses in the surrounding of Amsterdam are mostly brick and older. And Rotterdam has only been quite recently been growing absurdly after the Second World War. In the 60s and 70s, it was actually the biggest harbor in the world. So the lighthouses that you can find there are very functional structures.
Yeah.
Quite beautiful, actually. And what is also interesting in the harbor of Rotterdam is because it's growing so fast that you have these lighthouses from the 60s close to the city, and then from the 70s a little further to the North Sea, and then from the 80s. So you can actually do a kind of tour and see where the harbor grew and where the new lighthouses were being built just further to the North Sea coast. Just when you compare them, the lighthouses near Amsterdam and Rotterdam, they're completely different types of lighthouses. Yeah.
Is there anything else that occurs to you to do with the history of the lighthouses there, and maybe especially anything to do with the people, the keepers and families, these people who used to live at the lighthouses?
Yeah, well, in the Netherlands, from the 70s, they were all automated. So the keepers all left their keeper houses. But it's quite interesting when you look at the sources and the historical stories that we have, that most of the keepers wanted to stay in those buildings. They were really they of course they loved where they lived, but they also loved their jobs. So when they decided to automate them all, there are some stories that they wrote letters or asked, can we just stay here as long as we can? They also had actually quite a responsibility, you probably know that, but sometimes they had to maintain 4 or 5 lighthouses close to each other. And when one of these lights went out, they were actually responsible if an accident happened. And they also had to keep when it's foggy outside, they have to.
In this country, we had at some places fog horns.
Yeah, fog horns.
Some places bells, fog bells. Did you have a lot of fog horns at Dutch lighthouses?
Yeah. When you see these little pictures, most of them have these fog horns, right next to the building. So there are also some stories where they live with like 5 or 6 kids and a wife, and during the night they have to use this foghorn all the time. So it was challenging to live there, I think.
Do you still have active fog signals at some of the lighthouses? Are those still, are they completely turned off at this point?
They're completely turned off, yeah.
They are? Okay, I didn't realize that. I know that the country of Ireland, I think about 10 years ago, discontinued all their fog signals. And I know that it's being discussed in a lot of countries, but I didn't realize that your country isn't using those. I think they don't have obviously the value to navigation that they once had. Do you know if there are any old fog signals at light stations in the Netherlands that are operated for demonstration purposes? Like we have some here, and in England, some of the old, horns that run on compressed air, that kind of thing. It's very, very loud. You don't have anything like that?
We don't. No.
Okay.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, they're pretty incredible, the sounds. Yeah. You talked about the tours that the Dutch Lighthouse Association runs. I was looking online and I saw that our organization called Operation Europe offers an 11-day lighthouse tour starting in Amsterdam. Do you have any connection with that, or is that a totally separate thing?
It's totally separate. We do trips abroad multiple times a year, but it's only for our own members, and we don't organize with other partners. Maybe it is a good idea for the future. You mentioned it in the beginning of our conversation that you do these tours.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's a good idea for us to consider this, actually.
Yeah.
But for now, we don't. Now, only our own members are able to subscribe for our tours. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Well, I hope this is the start of a discussion leading towards the next U.S. Lighthouse Society tour in your country. I would love to see that happen, and I'm going to lobby to be a part of it when it does when it does happen. And maybe there could be some cooperation between the organizations. I think that'd be wonderful, and vice versa. If you guys want to have a tour in the United States, by all means, let us know, and we can help make things happen. If you ever feel like crossing the pond over this way.
That would be very cool.
Yeah. So let me ask you a final question for bonus points, okay? And that question is, why do you feel it's important to preserve lighthouses?
Well, it's especially for the Netherlands, it's because they are so intertwined with our history. What I try to explain with these 3 lighthouses, in the Netherlands, our history is so full of our maritime history. And if you reach the theme of maritime history in the Netherlands, you immediately come to the lighthouses. So for the Netherlands, the preservation of these lighthouses actually of the preservation of our own history. And for me personally, it's just something I've always had a fascination for. So for me personally, I can't imagine losing these lighthouses, and I will try everything to keep them for now and in the future.
Yeah. Excellent. You grew up near the coast, right?
Yeah.
So the ocean was an interest, something that attracted you when you were young.
Yeah. I grew up in Friesland. It's a province in the north with a lot of water.
Yeah.
And we have in the west of the Netherlands, we have these sand coasts, and in the north we have these very hard dikes just to keep the sea out. And if you walk on these dikes, you see lighthouses in the west, and you see them in the north on the small islands just in the sea.
Yeah.
And when we visited them with my parents, I was always looking at them. So that's something that happened. Yeah.
I understand. I grew up on the coast, and I wasn't really aware of lighthouses as a kid, but something about islands, looking out and seeing islands, I found them very intriguing. I think that goes for a lot of people living on the coast. Well, Getjan de Boer, I just want to thank you so much. It's really interesting, and I think a lot of us U.S. lighthouse buffs are aware that there's some really historic lighthouses. I mean, but your lighthouse history in your country goes back to the 1300s, which is pretty amazing. There were not many lighthouses in the world, so it just shows the maritime importance of the Netherlands. And it's all interesting, and thank you so much for sharing this information. And I wish you all the luck in the world with the Dutch Lighthouse Association and all your efforts to preserve Dutch lighthouses and their history. So thank you so much, Jan. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Jeremy, for having me again. And it was an honor.
The website of the Dutch Lighthouse Association is at vuurtorens.org. That's VUURTORENS.org. Most of it is in Dutch, but if you select English at the top, you can read the introduction in English. There's also a video posted on the front page that you can watch with English subtitles.
And I'll just mention that vuurtoren is the Dutch word for lighthouse, as actually we talked about with Getjan in the interview. And as Getjan said, the Dutch have an extremely rich maritime history. The Dutch Navy was the most powerful navy in the world for a while in the 1600s. Today, the port of Rotterdam is the largest seaport in Europe and the 10th largest in the world in terms of annual cargo tonnage. It was a pleasure speaking with Getjan for today's interview, and I'm really hoping I can visit his country one of these years. Next, we're going to have a Be a Lighthouse segment.
Our Be a Lighthouse segments honor people and organizations who are doing good in our communities. Today, we're honoring Eloise Brooks in Asheville, North Carolina.
13-year-old Eloise has been setting up a stand near her home in Asheville, selling homemade hot chocolate to raise money for UNICEF, the United Nations Children's Fund, an agency that provides humanitarian and developmental aid to children worldwide.
She told a local TV station that she learned about the crisis in Ukraine and felt it was important to get involved. She said, quote, "If I can do something, it's worth helping," unquote. Eloise said she just hopes her efforts help the Ukrainians in some way. As of late March, she had already raised more than $800.
Our thanks to Eloise Brooks for shining her light as a lighthouse in her community.
Thanks, as always, to everyone associated with the U.S. Lighthouse Society in Hansville, Washington, and around the world. Go to uslhs.org to learn more about the tours, preservation grants, and everything the Society offers. Memberships and donations help support this podcast.
If you listen through Apple Podcasts or any platform that lets you post reviews, please rate and review us.
The author Charles Dickens once said, quote, "No one is useless in this world who lightens the burdens of another," unquote.
On next week's episode of Lighthearted, we'll be talking with Shannon King, curator for the Fort Rod Hill and Fiskard Lighthouse National Historic Site in British Columbia, Canada. As always, to all our regular listeners and to our new ones, thank you so much for listening, and
keep a good light.